Beneficence means to do good, to practice kindness, generosity, and charity toward others. It means actively promoting others' well-being. Although most of us would readily acknowledge the importance of doing good for others, in real life, it can feel difficult to consistently feel compassion toward others and behave in ways that help them. Recent years have produced inspiring examples of beneficence, as well as alarming manifestations of polarization and harm. In these challenging times, how should we think about our responsibilities to care for people that we know and love, as well as for others whom we don't know, disagree with, or even feel harmed by? How does caring for ourselves fit into this picture? This year, the Mudd Center's program will address the theme of beneficence, practicing an ethics of care. It will harness the wisdom of prominent and innovative thinkers whose work addresses concepts of beneficence, as well as pathways toward practicing care well. If we aspire to practice beneficence within our personal, public, and professional lives, how can we manifest this value in our actions? How might we increase our capacity for care and compassion? What are some barriers to practicing care for self and others within our complex relationships and within social systems that may not seem to foster beneficence? In addition to our traditional public lectures, this year the Mudd Center's program will include an interactive series of events called Care Labs that will deepen and personalize our exploration of care. Care Labs will be offered by a poet, developmental scientist, a philosopher, educators, a playwright, and a meditation expert. The Mudd Center will produce Care Labs in partnership with departments and programs all over campus. For instance, a collaboration between the Mudd Center, museums at WNL, and the University Library will link the Museum Menagerie exhibit in Watson Galleries with a lecture on the psychology of human-animal relationships and a community pet project. Caring well for others may be the central duty and desire of our lives, and also the most challenging. I hope this program will give us space to contemplate this responsibility from multiple perspectives and set intentions for carrying it out with purpose and sensitivity. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Carla Murdoch, Director of the Mudd Center for Ethics, and I am delighted that you have joined us for Professor Lynny Chin's lecture, which is Belonging in the Bubble, Traversing the Indifferences that Divide Us. So this lecture is part of the Mudd Center's Beneficence series, which explores our responsibilities to promote and safeguard the well-being of others, and also how we can do that well, how we can care for others well. Before we begin tonight, let's pause to appreciate that we gather on the ancestral homelands of the Monacan Indians, who have lived here for over 10,000 years and continue to live here today. In order to learn more about Monacan culture and history, I encourage you to join Victoria Ferguson's Monacan pottery demonstrations in the Reeves Museum of Ceramics on March 10th and 11th. Ms. Ferguson is the interim director of the American Indian and Indigenous Community Center at Virginia Tech, and she's an enrolled member of the Monacan Indian Nation of Virginia. Her pottery demonstrations are associated with the exhibit on campus titled Mother Clay, the Pottery of Three Pueblo Women, which is produced by museums at WNL. So I encourage you to take advantage of that next week. And now to our main event. Professor Lynny Chin is a faculty member in WNL's own Department of Sociology and Anthropology. She earned a BA from Cornell University and a PhD in sociology at Stanford University. Her scholarship focuses on structural factors that encourage people's attachment to groups. Her recent work has addressed students' understandings of what it means to fit in and belong at college, in social as well as in academic spheres. At WNL, she teaches a signature course called Belonging in College that explores what it means to belong, as well as how academic institutional structures shape inequities in terms of who gets to fit in and who belongs. Today, Professor Chin will bring our consideration of beneficence and care home. She will share with us reflections on what caring as a community means at WNL. So please join me in welcoming her to the stage.
Can you guys hear me? All right, fantastic. Let me know if I'm a little loud, and I'll try to be a little bit quieter. I have a loud voice already, so I don't know if it's smart to have put me up into a microphone. Well, hi. Yay, yay. Well, thank you so much for coming. It's a little bit bright here, so I'm going to back up a little bit. I'm super honored to be able to talk today in the Mudd series because I've really enjoyed the prior talks. And why did I enjoy the prior talks? Well, I really enjoyed them because they really made me stop and think about what is beneficence? And what does it mean to practice beneficence when you share the same community? And so even though, well, I guess this is the first time Carla didn't recap all of the talks. So I am going to recap elements of some of the prior Mudd talks, if you hadn't had the chance to see them, that I actually think have bearing on this one. And oh, this doesn't work. We know how to fix this. All right, bear with me for just a second. All right. Meanwhile, while I do this, how are people feeling? Good? Good? Okay, excellent. Good to know. Okay. Sorry, I can't see small print from here, so you might have to let me know. Am I anywhere near where it says slideshow? Oh, yes, it does. All right, cool. First, second, or third button should I be pushing? Far left, thank you. It's such small print. All right, does it work? Okay, no, wait, does this work? Oh, technical difficulties already. Ah, yay! Excellent, we got to the first slide. Well, Karen Storr's beneficence talk was about how to help others. And she came to the conclusion that we should help people in ways that respects their capacities and their desires, even if it's not what we want or what we think is best. So in doing so, she says that you have to balance love which she called positive duties of helping people, which kind of closes the gap between you and other people to meet their needs and achieve their goals, with this idea of respect, which she called negative duties, or involved kind of maintaining a distance between yourself and others to allow people their own agency over their own choices. The next talk that I think was really interesting was John Lysaker's talk, which was about beneficence in the context of friendship. And he dissected friendship as this voluntary relationship that we choose to be connected to our friends. And it is our choice to act in the service and of care for them. And so that allows us to see our people who we think of as our friends as unique and irreplaceable individuals. And that in itself encourages deep investment of what happens to them. So Lysaker also did mention that we can't live our lives like friendship, because that has drawbacks too. So things like favoritism, or the fact that we can't all become friends. But his point was really interesting, it was that we can learn a lot about understanding how we view and treat others under this type of relationship. But what was really interesting about Lysaker's talk was it brings up questions like, what does it mean to care for someone who's a stranger? For people who we have no connection with them, or for people who we believe we dislike, or may have goals who are diametrically opposed or interfere with the things that we may want to defend or that we may want to achieve. And that's why it was really awesome. The next talk in the series was Seema Gajwani's talk. And she addressed this issue head on. And her Beneficence talk was about this process of restorative justice. And she talked about restorative justice as this kind of alternative means of bridging and hopefully healing the divide between the inherently conflictual relationship between those who have been harmed and those who harm them. And undergirding Gajwani's talk was this discussion of how sharing mutual vulnerability can form the foundations of trust. So not just between the harmed and the harmer, but their entire supportive network. So going beyond just the focal people involved and creating an entire healing community. And it's having that healing community that is necessary for true reconciliation. So that brings us to today, to today's talk. And what does it mean to care for others in a community and to create a community of beneficence? What does it mean to support each other even when, or really especially when, we aren't friends? Or perhaps we have different goals or envision different things for what we want our community to be. I think everyone pretty much knows we don't have to roll back too far in our own collective memory to draw up tensions over community values and community goals. Our community, like all communities, has many different parties, and so tensions shouldn't be a surprise. So like this year alone, right, we can really remember controversial editorials, controversial speakers, even court cases, right? Yeah, exactly. And so two especially very divisive examples involving pretty much every party on our campus in the past 2 years, administrators, staff, faculty, students, their parents, alumni, have been two big issues. One, right, and maybe only seniors remember this, but how much regulation should the university have around student social activities during COVID? And of course, the second one, which everyone talks about a lot, is whether or not, even the outside community, whether or not Washington and Lee should change its name. So, oh no, that's the wrong button, that's a laser pointer. Okay. So today, I really hope we can contemplate together, what does it mean to traverse bubbles and care for each other, especially for people who are not our friends, or for those who we may believe we have antipathy towards. And so today's talk is going to be in 3 parts. Part 1, I'm going to make the case that WNL is not just a bubble in and of itself, but that we coexist in different bubbles within our community that can both protect us, but also inherently divide us. But also that there are isms that are built into our structural framework that make some bubbles bigger, some bubbles more dominant, some bubbles more powerful. And it's not just in our policies or everyday practices, but also in our expectations for what we think is normal. And this creates a differential sense of belonging to our campus community. Part 2 is going to be about the importance of mutually recognizing emotions and their structural source as a means of shortening the distance between bubbles. And I really want to emphasize the importance of believing, and acknowledging others' emotions, and also trying to understand their structural source. So I'm gonna make a big note here. I am not saying that realizing that people can share similar emotions equates their feelings or their societal or historical causes, nor do I believe that noticing people share similar emotions merges bubbles or makes them see eye to eye. Caring for the well-being and sense of belonging for others who share our community, it isn't contingent on liking them, on being friends with them, or even agreeing with them. But I do think that understanding others' emotional points of view by believing, again, one more time, believing their emotions and experiences are real to them, and then trying to understand the structural source of those feelings can form the basis for beneficence. And because of this, I'm going to make another argument, that the greatest danger to developing a community of beneficence are not parties that are diametrically opposed to each other with great antipathy, but that when people feel apathetic or indifferent to others' feelings, you can't connect to those who don't care or who don't believe their emotions are intertwined with yours. Part 3, I'm gonna bring it on home and talk about the importance of belonging and how understanding emotions related to belonging can be one foundation for community beneficence. Okay, part 1. So when I first got here, and I think probably most of you have probably felt this too, when you first got here, I kept hearing students kept calling WNL a bubble, meaning that it's insular from the outside world. Oops, yeah, well, yes, okay. But the more students that I met who described their lives and feelings of belonging, whether it was in class or in papers or in my office, what really struck me was how much we live our lives in little bubbles that, little bubbles within the university that don't always cross. And so, for example, there's bubbles that we can't cross because of the roles that we have, right? So, for students, you wouldn't expect a pack of faculty to hop onto Trav and end up at the pool houses on a Friday night anymore, right? Then faculty members will expect students to come, except for maybe the occasional EC president, to come to a faculty meeting. Or we can consider things like, a student athlete, right? Sometimes they have to balance academics versus practice versus any other extracurricular activities. But the point I want to kind of have you take away is that the bubbles we live in can affect our feelings of belonging. All right, so the first thing I actually kind of want to say, I want to say that everybody struggles with belonging in a community. And it's all students, but it's also faculty and staff too. But again, the power structure that builds what is normal on campus creates a differential basis of support and access to resources. So those can be material resources, things like funding, space, but also intangible ones like a feeling of safety, a feeling of security, pride, respect. And such that because there is this power structure, some groups of people may have an easier time gaining access and a sense of fit and belonging to their community. So undergirding the power structure are what I like to call the schisms. They're the schisms that divide us. And again, similar to Oscar Jerome Stewart's talk about individualism and how it's embedded into the business school curricula, all of these isms are built into our structural framework of everyday life. And so, right, it's not just our ideology, it's also our policies, our everyday routines, and that can affect both our material and effective outcomes. Though they can be, the embedding of isms isn't necessarily purposely discriminatory, right? Because when we plan something, we plan with people as the recipients or the audience or the target or the market in mind, whether we notice or whether we articulate that or not. So like this talk, right? I would hold this lecture very, very differently if you were a bunch of toddlers at 5 p.m. versus like a whole group of college-educated adults. And so, again, what I kind of want to say is like Stewart said, we end up taking these frameworks for granted as a reality because we expect our normal to be the default. This makes its assumptions seem inevitable, natural, the way it should be. And because of that, all alternatives, other ways of being, they become invisible. And so this brings us to the idea of college pathways. So college pathways affect everybody on campus, but I'm going to talk in terms of students. So according to Armstrong and Hamilton, college pathways are the informal and formal institutionalized practices that universities create through their policies or their lack thereof of policies that structure students' everyday life. And that shapes the ability for some to extract benefits from those experiences. So although there can be many college pathways that can be built, usually a dominant one emerges, making it really difficult for students to conceptualize fit beyond that main path. And it is in those different pathways that many of these like isms, right, are embedded. And college pathways showcase, right, they're important because they showcase what is normal, what is valued in a community through the construction of the quote unquote typical student. And that determines the typical student who fits and who does not. And let me try to get this back over here. Oh no, that's bad. Okay, we'll go back here. I did not realize my fingers would actually take it off the schedule. So anyway, so prior research is really interesting because it suggests that by prioritizing and normalizing certain kinds of values and certain kinds of lifestyles, university identity and culture can create de facto standards that advantage some types of students over others. And WNL isn't any exception to this, I'm sure you guys know, especially with student conceptions of what is WNL's image. So what I'm about to show and ask you guys to reflect on is a bunch of pictures that I had students either draw in class or at students' talks, where I asked them to just draw me WNL's image. Come, sit down, draw whatever comes to mind. And what I want you guys to do is I want you to just sit and notice what you notice. And then be ready for, they're gonna come around with microphones and tell us what it is that you see. So there's gonna be 2 panels, okay? Just sit, notice what you notice. This is to the answer of the question, does WNL have an image? Please draw it for me. Okay. Panel 1, I'm gonna do a panel 2 now. I can go back to panel 1. Here's panel 2. Okay, in case you want to say, gotta pull another all-nighter, 3 papers, 3 exams, can't wait for Friday. Trav, there you go. All right, work hard, you guys can read the rest. Okay, everybody ready? So when you're ready, just wag your fingers at either Oscar or Carla, and what is it that you see? What is it that these images tell you about what students perceive WNL's image to be?
Okay, so it's interesting that these have people dressed in suits because that's not really something you'd see walking around, I would say. You wouldn't see someone with a bow tie on a typical Thursday, but there's this attitude maybe of professionalism or some type of status associated with the suit, so that's interesting.
Great, thank you, Lily, that's awesome, right? Yeah, so they're all in suits. I mean, that brings up this other thing. What gender is everybody? Yeah, right, it was really interesting. Even women drew men, which was strange. Yeah, other thoughts. There's other microphones going around, yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah. No, absolutely, it definitely has that could be Huntley, though they've got a whole bunch of beer bottles in front of Huntley, maybe. Either that or it's the colonnade, I'm not exactly sure. But yeah, absolutely. What about these ones? Yeah.
It's a lot about partying, especially in the last slide. There's the one that has the beer bottles thrown everywhere.
Oh yeah.
And then on the next slide, there's a lot about it too. But then there's also this and I think it's interesting because it kind of intersects with the suits.
Yeah.
Is this notion of work hard, play hard.
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty interesting.
Absolutely, work hard, play hard. And even the partying is specifically, right? The partying is specifically Greek. That we can kind of see, well, maybe not here, but we can the connotation again with these suits and bow ties are there. Cam was wondering, yeah. Oh. Uh-huh. Yeah, they didn't work in a group. I made people like, draw separately and draw what you draw. Yeah, oh, yay, yeah, yay. Thank you, Kim, yeah. Thanks, Nija. Hi.
I also think that the suits, like, it is crazy that they all drew the same person, but I think beyond, like, the suit itself, I think it's representing, like, this idea that WNL is a school for rich kids kind of thing, and that there's this level of a specific look you're supposed to have and adhere to, and obviously that people do adhere to because it's a commonality among these pictures.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so sorry, I'm not going to take any more because we're going to do more activities later. So thank you for everyone. Woo, give it from the hand. It's brave. It's so hard to talk in front of other people. I know this right now, and so it's kind of scary. And I would say, when I ask students the same question in terms of does WNL have an image in interviews, they say what you guys are saying too, right? Regarding class, they even added Southern here, right? So Leslie says, I would say WNL has an image because it definitely markets a certain type. Southern, preppy, rich, white, Anglo-Saxon. And George is like, it's super white. He really did say it like that. He was like, it's super white. Southern, rich, fraternity, Greek life. Those are the 4 words, that's it. Now I'm just gonna back up just a little bit and let you know where these quotes come from. So I'll be sharing throughout this part 1 an amalgamation of different data sources. So many of the quotes that I use are from a series of semi-structured interviews, either conducted in 2015, 2016 with 163 students, or 2021 with 50 students. And so you can ask me about any of the data sources during Q&A. All right, so going back to these quotes, right? Jessica really highlighted the same things that you guys were kind of highlighting right over here. But she also talks about the standard for what we've highlighted, this idea of kind of the mold, right? And that's actually something that's interesting in and of itself, that there's this idea of the WNL image as being a mold. And that word is really evocative when you think about what a mold is, but also what a mold does. Right? It's really interesting. But anyway, as Jessica says, right, she recaps what you guys were saying, but she also adds on, I feel like anything that deviates from that is just not weird, but not expected or not included in what really happens. So again, Jessica's words highlight a belief in one clear, dominant social standard for what it means to fit in. And, I think this expectation is easier for some to hit than others. So Will was a really great interviewee because he actually noticed what many of my white Greek interviewees had a really hard time articulating, and for many, even noticing. And perhaps that's because, you can kind of see this in the background here, Will experienced not being in alignment with the dominant social pathway of his high school. But for him, campus felt safe. Right? He says, this was a safe environment for me. I think it just made me more comfortable. If it influences my actions while I'm here, I'm sure it does in ways that you are just not thinking about. It's not something that I think about a lot, but then I fit the mold. Somebody who was not, maybe they would be kind of hyper-aware. So Will's words really highlight how we take for granted being on the dominant path. It's only when we aren't on that path do we notice that we're not on it, right? We were there neither on that path or we believe that that path has changed or has varied. And again, I am not trying to say that people who fit the mold don't experience problems with either fit or belonging. In fact, my research shows that white students either live in the shadow of this idealized vision of the mold, while non-white students live in the shadow of the mold as the average or the typical student. Both of these standards come with very high pressures, and both of them can be very hard to deal with. However, going back to the dominant social pathway, Greek life, right, on campus, that's a dominant social pathway. It is clear that different racial groups generally have different experiences with regards to social life on campus. So this right over here, this is a table of the average percentage of the university's official racial groups by Greek life. And we can see right over here on average from 2016 to 2020, on average 81% of white students every single year were Greek. And no other racial group, all of them are less than 70%. International students and black students have particularly low rates on average of joining the Greek system. You might be like, what the heck is going on with this on top of the table with American Indian or Alaskan Native students? That was because in my first year of data, I had 2 students and they were both Greek, and then I think they must have graduated because every other year after that, there were no more American Indian and Alaskan Native students in the data that I was sent. And so over 5 years, that's 20% rate. But I felt weird, I can't say that it was like 80% independent because they were 100% the one year I had them in the data. So, okay, well, why would this matter? Well, it matters because the demographic breakdown with regards to the Greek system really matters because it highlights how students can live very different lives on campus. But it also, I think, highlights how the dominant path can affect our sense of belonging. Right? Whether or not you're on the dominant path or off of that dominant path. So this is from a couple of years ago. So in collaboration with Hunter Swanson at the Center for International Education, my spring term belonging in college class helped run a survey. And they were amazing. So if there are any stratcom professors or majors out there, they teach you well because they really figured out how to sell and market our survey as a BuzzFeed quiz. Like that was really awesome. And while we didn't capture a random sample, my class tried to approximate trying to capture a random sample by canvassing all of the dorms on campus as a recruiting equivalent. They made and handmade and then hand-delivered 999 bags of treats and a survey link, and that really, really paid off because we had 355 students take our survey. So just so you know, because this will make a little bit more sense for the next slide, our sample was more racially diverse and female than the student body. So there we go. So one set of questions that we asked was about belonging. And this was rated on a 7-point scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree. So I see myself as part of the campus community. I feel that I'm a member of the campus community. I feel a sense of belonging to the campus community. And all this number means right over here is that if people rated high on this scale, they were likely to rate high across all 3 and vice versa. Cool, okay. We also asked this question, which was an open-ended question of what, if anything, makes you feel like you belong at W and L? And Hunter made these really beautiful, right? They're beautiful, like illustrative word clouds from this open-ended question. And the larger the font, right, the greater the frequency of responses. And here, take a look at it for a bit, and you don't have to worry about microphones, but do you see a difference? Yeah. I was going to say, what's the difference, but I don't want you to have to deal with the microphone. So clearly, right, Greek students derive a sense of belonging from being part of Greek life. And the reason why sorority is so large, again, our sample is majority female. While independent students, right, they gain a sense of belonging from diversity organizations, especially attending their events. We also looked at the socio-demographic factors of students and how that's related to their sense of belonging. So bear with me, because I know not everyone likes numbers, and I promise this is going to be the only slide for it. And so model 1, so that's this one right over here, it looked at gender, sorry, I'm going to, because it's bright, gender, race, and financial aid status, and how it would be associated with belonging. So if you look right on the top right over here, female, right? So females compared to male, and this is not bolded, or does it have stars next to it. So really what this means is that men and women had approximately the same sense of belonging on campus. However, we also did race. So URM means underrepresented minorities. So that's Black, Latinx, and American Indian students. We also had Asian as a group and multiracial as a group. And these 3 groups were compared to the default, which are white students. And if you can see right over here, this is starred and it's negative and it's bolded. Underrepresented minorities and Asian students had a lower sense of belonging to campus than white students. Multiracial students, there was no difference between them and white students with regards to sense of belonging. When we come to here, which is the degree of financial aid, so the higher the financial aid, the lower, because this is negative, the lower the sense of belonging. Then, of course, right, I've been talking about Greek life. Model 2 adds in independent versus Greek. So this is right here, right? And we can see right over here, independent students, they have less belonging sense than Greek students. But we can also see what is very clear, that, Greek life doesn't fully account for the lower sense of belonging for underrepresented minorities or students who have higher sense of financial aid. And how do we know this? Well, we can tell this because these numbers are still negative, and they're still statistically significant after we've included not Greek or independent into the model. And the reason why I wanted to highlight this is because I often have students tell me that Greek life and whether or not you join is really the only division that matters on campus. And if we could only diversify Greek system, then that would solve all of our problems with differential belonging. But clearly, right, the data show that that is not true. Race and class still matter even after we account for whether or not you decided to join the Greek system. Now, I do think that diversifying the Greek system can be beneficial, but I don't think it should be the only intervention. We've come a really long way from the Assimilation Committee, right? You guys might have heard about this, but this was this committee from last century in the 1900s, right? It didn't end until, I think, approximately like late 1960s or so, which was student-run, and it policed student attire to have proper dress on campus. And what I really just wanted to highlight, right, is assimilation into the dominant path isn't the only answer for creating a sense of belonging or a sense of ownership of space. Clearly, right, support for alternative forms of college pathways can help. So here are answers of the open-ended questions of what, if anything, makes you feel like you belong at WNL, divided between underrepresented minority students and white students. And again, I'm gonna let you time to kind of look at this. And again, we can clearly see that the different types of organizations provide belonging for different groups. For white students, again, Greek life, being on sports teams, was very important for white students. But for underrepresented minority students, OIE organizations were very important. So I do think, right, encouraging diversity in Greek life can be one part of a multi-pronged solution, but not just in the terms that I always hear students talk to me about, which is diversifying and integrating the traditional Greek system. I think you can think about things like expanding what is the meaning of Greek system on campus. So for example, some of it's already maybe starting to happen with bringing in this kind of step show with the historically Black fraternities in February. This isn't to say, right, that non-white students can't find place in Greek life, because clearly they do. However, I do want to note that the mere fact that whiteness is incorporated as part of the whole package forces all minority students to grapple with that fact. Indeed, non-white students who join the Greek system frequently talk about how their positive experiences in the Greek system or being incorporated into that dominant path are rare or lucky. For many, that comes with feelings of guilt because they enjoy what other non-white students do not. Let's take a look at Ralph right over here. And Ralph, I think, is really interesting because he sees himself as having an almost perfect fit with the WNL mold, but except for, right, I fit in as your typical WNL student in persona, if not by physical image. I think that my experience is pretty unique. That's more of the exception than the rule, rather than normal. Or take a look at Sophie. My experiences isn't the rule, it's an exception. I think joining a sorority wasn't expected for me. I do think that my positive journey through it is the exception. I don't think like it's the rule. I got very lucky. I feel like my experiences is very lucky. So both Ralph and Sophie are treating as exceptional, as luck, what many white students take for granted or feel is an expectation, perhaps even for some a burden, to join Greek life. And non-white students, even once they are in the Greek system, can experience the same social events very differently because of their race. So Cameron right over here experiences nervousness and anxiety entering parties instead of fun, because she's worried she'll draw attention or encounter a negative interaction because she's Black. throughout our interview, Cameron also described how her race and sorority are intertwined as she sees a link between her sorority's tier, or social rank, and the racial diversity of its members, such that the lower the tier is related to the higher number of non-whites. And as she states, right, oh gosh, am I gonna get kicked out because I'm not in the top tier? Or like, are people looking at me weird because I'm one of 4 Black students in here? So it always makes me nervous to like walk into some place and all of a sudden have all these eyes on you, and maybe again, something negative is gonna happen. Or maybe like, even if it doesn't, maybe they are thinking in their head negative things about me. So even when she's joined the dominant social pathway, Cameron also has to deal with extra worry. Alex, right over here, who is Black, Greek, and also of a high status sport, also struggles with something that I think a lot of particularly white students don't think about, is your ability to be an individual. And Alex describes how he never himself gets to be an individual on campus. I want more than anything else to put this racial identity in the back of my mind and just be Alex, the student, the athlete. No? Because of where I'm at, I'm Alex, the Black student, the Black athlete, and I can't remove that. I just want to be a kid. I want to be, you know what I mean? But it's not possible here, because every day, at every corner, you're reminded of difference. And social life isn't the only place where we can find divisions. So academic space is divided by gender and race as well. So here's a breakdown percentage of different race and gender groups of first declared majors. And so it's not going to surprise anybody, but the most common majors set is the Williams School. But this is particularly true for white men, right? Where 60% of white men had Williams School's majors, compared to 35% of non-white women. But even white women and non-white men were less than 50%. We can also think of this data in a different way, right? Another way is to compare the rates of majors to the percent makeup of the student body. And again, we can see right here, where's women? Yeah, like women, okay? How they are more likely to join the arts and humanities than the Williams School. And so I'm about to share some quotes that come from some focus groups collected in collaboration with Janelle Gertz from English and Elizabeth Gilbert from Business Administration. And we conducted them last year. I saw Cam, Hannah, and Marilyn were wonderful RAs who conducted the focus groups. And these focus groups were about how do students go around picking a major, and what are their impressions of the arts and humanities. So again, like thinking about how we live in different bubbles, these kind of divisions often lend to even stereotyping of majors. So it's not going to surprise people, but there is this stereotype of Williams School students as frat bros. And so, right, like I kind of associate it with being really fratty, a really frat bro energy. Yeah, people who are in Greek life are definitely econ, business, accounting majors. And then this student was like, C-school, so male. And this is different from STEM stereotypes, right? Where there's this idea that STEM students are overworked and missing out on all the fun at WNL. STEM majors, they don't have a life. They seem to be working all the time, bajillion labs. And then this student was a senior and working on an honors thesis and was like, I missed out on this big social culture of WNL. And finally, right, we have the arts and humanities stereotypes, which kind of posited them as a naive social justice warrior liberal. So these are people who take a little bit of pride in not being mainstream and expressing themselves differently. And I feel like this kind of makes sense at this school because pursuing the arts is kind of on the fringe of the general flow of the school. So again, right, dominant pathway, only this time it is academic. So even here, right, being outside of the norm can affect students' behaviors and feelings. So for example, this student right over here talks about with regards to class participation. So both business and philosophy classes are male-dominated typically, which is weird now that I'm realizing it. I have a lot to think about why I don't talk in class. Here's George, who was he's Black, he was independent, also a Williams School major, and he actually discusses how uncomfortable it was to be in class, even though he really enjoyed his major. But you can imagine kind of like how a mindset of being uncomfortable from the beginning to the end can actually affect your enthusiasm for the class that you are in. it's gonna be so awkward when you're just by yourself, you know, the silent kid. I don't wanna be the silent kid, I wanna be the talking kid. The first day, they make their circles. I'm in the middle and there's like a space around me. They talk about parties you didn't even hear about, you know. You're left out. So this brings us to part 2, right? Now that we can kind of see that the bubbles we create or live in have very different experiences of the same community. And so now we get to talk about, what might help us traverse these differences. So I'm gonna go back to Seema Gajwani's talk. If you were there, you might have remembered that she had a lot of stories, but one of the stories that she describes was how she and a bunch of her legal team went to a school who had just massively downsized, and they were having a restorative justice session. And she described how uncomfortable it was. But once someone started sharing their emotions, this broke the ice, and people began to relax. So sharing emotions allowed people to connect, and by the end, when her team had to leave early, and even though they were originally strangers, outsiders, they got hugs. Which imagine that, right? And her story really highlights how people connect and learn to trust one another, not necessarily through rationality or logic, but because we can connect each other through emotions that we feel others feel. And that's why, if you didn't get a chance to see it, the Beneficence pet exhibit was really powerful, because the emotions we share about our relationships are things that we can all feel, right? Whether it is anger, whether it's injustice, fear, sadness, but also positive things, right? Like love, excitement, joy. And accepting others' emotions makes conflict, even when you're diametrically opposed, I think feel less zero-sum. And that's why stories move us, because emotions ground how real and lived experiences are, right? The feelings resonate with us more than any statistics or facts or figures. I guarantee the quotes that you read probably touched you more than that table that we had a few slides ago. So step 1, believe in others' emotions. They are the emotions you feel too, and we can empathize with that. If we believe others' emotions are real, we are likely to accept that what they say about their lived experiences are real. But it's not about equating emotions or feelings and saying, oh, well, we all feel the same, so we're good, right? Because we can't equate emotions, and we can't truly understand what someone else is feeling. And also, we have to acknowledge that emotions are not equal, and as importantly, we have to realize and accept the fact that some groups of people's emotions are not equally valued in our society. But what we can try to understand is that if we believe another's emotions are real, then we can do step 2, which is try to understand the structural or societal or historical sources of those emotions. Why might a person be feeling this way? What is it about their position in social structure that lends itself to why someone feels the way that they do? How are they envisioning social structure or the context that makes them feel this way? So we're gonna do an exercise. This hopefully we'll do multiple sets. What I have right over here is a poem by Amber Morrison. So Amber, I don't know if you guys know, is a graduating senior. She's an awesome poet, an awesome human being all around. And it's a really, really, really powerful poem. So we're only gonna have a chance, oh wait, where'd it go? Oh, a chance to look at an excerpt, but you can always contact me. I can send you the link. So I really recommend you read it in its entirety. I've got the link for you right here. So, okay. I wish white kids knew what it's like to be told your existence doesn't matter. Your fears are irrelevant. Your suffering is justified. Your sorrow, meaningless. The diversity delusion, they say, is that we seek to erase Lee because we're bitter. Maybe I am bitter. Bitter that we care more about dusty old white men long dead than very much breathing black kids who spend every morning mourning another black body put in the ground. Maybe I am bitter. Bitter that your freedom of speech often translates to freedom from consequence, when mine has often meant freedom or death. Maybe I am bitter. Bitter that money means merit here. Legacy doesn't make you deserving. Maybe I am bitter. Bitter that we pay more respect to a traitor's dead horse than to the enslaved people with hair and skin like mine and my eventual children's. I have every right to be bitter. Okay. Now, I want you to believe Amber. Believe her, right? What are some of the feelings of this author? So some microphones are gonna kind of come around. I want you to sit, think. I can bring it back to this other part, right? What are some of the emotions that Amber feels or is expressing in this poem? You can't tell me you didn't feel emotions from that. Give it a try, it's okay.
Frustration and anger.
Frustration and anger, absolutely, right? We can see this right over here. Now, one of the other things that I want us to think about, right, is why might the author feel this way? What image does the author have of our social structure? Putting aside whether you agree with it or not, whether this view resonates with you or not, tell me about the social structure this poem depicts and Amber's perception of her place in it. Don't make me make it like class. I know a lot of your names. I can call on you. Again, what social structure? Why? What is the source? Right? We heard a lot of feelings in here. What's the source of those feelings? Yeah, I'm not moving to the next slide. Yeah, thank you, Kim. Oh, I'm sorry, if someone else has it first. Yes, please.
I was just going to say it feels like a privilege not to be able to speak up, right? Like it's the root
sorry?
privilege that we're not speaking up, like, right?
It is, right? It is
I mean, I think it's
privilege.
pretty blatantly here that she's pointing out that the problem is racial and that essentially it's easy for us to brush that under the rug, but it's not for her.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you very much for getting this kind of conversation started, right? No, it's very clear, right? Like she is not heard. Not heard at all. And the whole structure of what we have makes it hard to speak, or makes it that Cam was maybe the first hand that I saw that is now, oh, okay, well, no one else is stepping up, I got to do it. Do you still want to do it? Yeah, thank you, right? Because maybe, and I don't know, like, was everyone in their mind waiting for someone like Cam, who may racially identify the same as Amber, to be the first one to speak? Maybe. Thank you very much for speaking, yeah.
I think for Amber, I personally know Amber as well. I think that for Amber, this
you can just think author, right?
Because the author, thank you. For the author, it translates to a story that we've been told for a long time since childhood. And it's a history that it translates to a history that is not just a history of what happened, but a warning tale. And when you see warning signs, you start seeing red.
Sure, yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? So she's talking about a structure of inequality. Does anyone else want to, I know it's scary. Anyone else want to give it a try? Ooh, I see another hand. Yay, thanks, Meg. Right, but as microphone's making her way to Meg, right, she's thinking about a structure and where she's placed into this structure, and what all of you are kind of pointing, she's placed in a structure where she is not heard or seen.
I like that as the poem goes on, it gets from like more like metaphorical all the way to literal and just very blatant. Yeah. And writing it down like that, I mean, the trader's dead horse versus enslaved people, it's like, okay, you know, you can't argue that.
Yeah.
It's so
we
so
have a literal
huge. It's
older marker on campus right here, then we have that sign.
I know that
no
plaque,
one, right?
that plaque is so tiny, and then
Yeah.
there's a dead horse. Yeah, so I really like that.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Well, let's go on to another example. I've got plenty of examples here for you guys. I wanted to juxtapose Amber's poem to a letter that I got a few years ago. And so it was from a WNL parent, and they read the profile the WNL magazine did on my research on belonging, and they sent me a letter of inquiry. Why is it no longer acceptable for white students whose parents might be wealthy and who participate in the Greek system to be free to be who they are at Washington and Lee? It's natural for people to gravitate towards others that are similar to them. There isn't anything at all wrong with having a similar background and shared experiences. But yet, in an effort to appease and cater to the feelings of a handful of minority students, you seem to be saying that white students and what they're looking for at Washington and Lee isn't of any value any longer. If you don't fit in at WNL, then there are other schools where you will fit in. There are places in which I wouldn't fit in, so I don't go to them. I don't go where I'll feel uncomfortable, and I don't go and expect things to change on my behalf. Not everything has to change. I know what's been happening at WNL, and I'm not happy about most of it. As parents who have spent our hard-earned money to educate our children, we don't like what we're seeing and hearing. Again, I want you to believe in the feelings of this author, regardless of whether or not it resonates with you. Just believe they are feeling what they are feeling. And let's talk about it. What are some of the emotions that this author is feeling? Yeah, Alina. Oh, can you hear her in the back? Yeah.
Thank you. I think that she's obviously angry, or they're obviously angry about what their child is facing because of pushback from minority students. But I thought the most interesting part that she said is that, where was it? If she doesn't feel like she fits in, she doesn't go there. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's a projection also of fitting into a mold and then staying with that, mm-hmm. and saying that since I had to experience it, other people should experience that same feeling, mm-hmm. As well. So.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, right? So there's anger that is here, and definitely anger about, well, you know, like, this is how I feel things should be. What are you doing to it? What other things? So again, right, why might, and Alina already started us down this path, why might the author feel this way? What image does the author have of our social structure? Again, putting aside, right, like, because I could hear you, like putting aside whether you agree or not with the author, whether or not it resonates with you. Tell me about the perceived social structure the writer of this letter depicts and the person's place of their own perception inside of it. Does the question make sense? Yeah. Okay. Oh, P, and then I see Andrea, and then I see Nigel again. Yeah, oh, so P is right over here, and then I see Andrea, so maybe Andrea go first while the microphone is going here. Yeah.
Okay. I think that this parent feels oppressed because allegedly Washington and Lee cares more about minority students than white students, pretty much.
Yeah, right? There's this feeling of oppression in a, you know, in a kind of a way that was similar to kind of Amber's poem, which is really interesting. Yeah, what else? Yeah, I saw, yeah, Pete.
I was basically going to say I thought it was interesting that it seems she's feeling the same thing as the previous author, but she believes the social structure is flipped and that they believe the power imbalances are flipped.
Yeah, she feels the social structure is flipped. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. You guys are pointing out really great things. Oh, hey, Nija.
I was going to say basically the same thing the other two people said, is that there's, I think what this author's kind of describing is like, you know, why do things have to change? And that change feels like oppression, or it feels like injustice, because they're obviously used to being very comfortable with the status quo. And so the assumption is that the status quo is like works for everybody. So why are we changing it? And it definitely works for this author. Right. So why are we changing it again? Yeah,
well, here's the structure that like goes beautifully, and if you don't want to join it, don't join it. Like, you know, you have this choice to not join it. Why are you changing when it's going, you know, wonderfully? Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, Evan, I see the hand right over there. Yeah. You know, while we're waiting for Evan to have this microphone, both for Amber, but also both for this right over here, I want you to also, I didn't ask you about this, but I want you to think about what are your own feelings reading or hearing these? Why do you feel the way that you do about the image? What's your place in the image? And how does that differ or resonate with your own view of social structure and your place, but also the author's place in it. Evan, go ahead.
I was just seeing how she really felt that, I think her control over the hegemonic white space that she has idealized in her head is spinning out of control, because that distance between her idealized view of WNL for her student or for her kids and her perspective on what it is actually now is growing. And I didn't think this.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's changing. What the heck? Why?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And so, one of the things I think these are really interesting kind of excerpt. Oops, wait, sorry. Here we go, back right over here. Is what you guys are so great at dissecting and analyzing and thinking about social structure, and I think that's awesome, because I think, like I said, that's definitely the big first, kind of steps. But I think what's the harder part, right, is, and just as important part, is believing in someone's emotions. Depending on where we are on the spectrum, we have an easier time believing one person's emotions over the other because it either resonates with us or not. But when we believe that another person feels anger and hurt, again, it feels less zero-sum. So if you believe as much as I believe that my own emotions are real, right? That the pain, the hurt, the anger, are real. And then if you try to understand why I feel this way, then hopefully I can do the same thing for you. And then that clearly is something that I think we can understand about one another. Again, you guys kind of saw parallels between them, and I think we can hopefully sympathize, even if we disagree about the veracity of the sources of those emotions. But again, to be clear, I am not trying to equate the emotions felt between the writers in terms of their sources. While both excerpts clearly show pain and anger of feeling unheard and disrespected, there is a definite, clear difference in the positionality of social power and the source of emotions between these two pieces. So again, though, right, even if we differ in our opinions about the legitimacy of the source, but if we believe, right, if we really believe in their emotions, then we can't deny what people feel are real. And so I believe that understanding and connecting to emotions is an opening for conversation, especially if we can try to understand the structural and historical roots for why someone feels the way that they do, on any side. So confronting our own and others' emotions and the roots can give us a common language for talking about conflict, especially around community goals. So it can bring distant bubbles closer together, because again, if we believe each other's emotions, we can start to believe what they experience is true for them. And then it becomes harder to dismiss. Again, this doesn't mean that people will end up agreeing or that we're going to see eye to eye or become friends or even not still continue to have diametrically opposing points of view. But the goal isn't to create consensus. The goal is to create connection and concern. So if we believe each other's experiences are real and engender real feelings, then again, I think this creates a common framework to work under. Because I don't know about you, but I don't think people want others in their own community to feel pain or angry or sad. I really do believe that we want others to experience contentment, joy, and to be happy in the community that we hopefully build together. I was going to have us, but I'm a little bit worried about time. So, this is a speech by Enuma, and so I really highly recommend you read it. I was actually going to juxtapose this to Rodney Mims Cook's a response to the Rimtung Phi article of his protest. He responded to the Rimtung Phi regarding the protests of his talk a few weeks ago, but I don't think we have time for that. But if you, again, want to do this exercise, I have links. I really, really recommend you read them both, especially Enuma's talk. Okay, but I think this is going to bring me to my next argument, right? Or do we need to do those exercises again, or do we get the point? Yeah, okay, all right, cool. Anyway, all right, so that brings me to my next argument that while empathy over shared emotions can open doors and for caring and for action, then it is indifference, which implies a lack of emotions or a lack of care or concern, which then leads to inaction. So indifference and apathy is as dangerous, if not more, than caring too much. Why? Well, with care, people are invested in what happens. With indifference, we let things be without ever considering what is important and why. And clearly, you can't accuse either the student activists or General's Redoubt from not caring what happens to our community. In fact, they care very much so, which is why the emotions are super high. And as weird as it's gonna sound, right? Because people care so much, that is a better basis for common ground in a way that indifference is not. So, like we said, right? Indifference and apathy are a lack of caring. When you don't care, you feel no sympathy and are emotionless. And when you don't feel emotions, there's nothing to connect over. So in my interviews, students on campus seem to say that there are three groups: those who want change, those who do not want change. And they actually tend to say, like, hey, you know, both of these groups' sizes on campus are about the same size, but also that both of these groups are sort of fringe groups on campus. But what is the third group is the majority of people. And the majority of people are people who don't care. And especially for non-white students, they express dealing with indifference and apathy as hard because it's more common than outright hate, as these quotes suggest. So Vanessa actually went to an MLK event and then ended up having conversation with people at her dinner, and she was just like, you know, the dinner was so nice, you know, the dinner is so nice, why don't more white people come? Then one girl answered the other saying, because they simply don't care. Like, they're not racist, they're not trying to say we white people are better than us, but they just simply don't care about diversity. Diversity, works, but not. It's like we exist. The 80% sees us, but it doesn't work because they don't care. Erica describes how her sorority sisters have no interest in coming to OIE events. And Audrey mentions that if it's not something that's already on someone's radar, there's no connection to it. So as long as they can partake in the activities that they came here for, I think that whatever other changes happen on campus, they're unconcerned with. And I think a lot of people are that way. Valerie, who also identifies as LGBT, describes her feelings of support on campus after an act of vandalism that happened to an LGBT student. And she describes this. So it's not something that directly affects them or their community. So I think to them, it's very out of their realms. So it's not something they care too much about. I think LGBT support was genuine. I just think it was very surface level genuine. And I think in some people's minds that rally should have been enough to show that LGBT students or prospective students that we're there for them and this is a welcoming campus. But I think living in a world where you deal with these small acts of homophobia rather than, you know, vandalism, it feels very surface level to me. So, right, oh, and then there's Henry, right, who is just like, well, they're always interested, like, oh, you're doing that? Okay, good luck. But they won't support it. They won't say anything against it. They're just like, no, that's new. So going back to dominant pathways, right? Why do they matter? Well, when you're apathetic or indifferent, it's because you don't think or you don't notice you're on the dominant pathway. So similar to Will that we talked about earlier, here's Dan, who is white and from a top tier or high status fraternity. And after I asked him whether or not WNL image affects him in his daily life, he says this. Like you can tell he's having a hard time answering. It's like, that image doesn't really come to my mind, at least. When you're here, that's the WNL image isn't really spoken about, or I don't think about it much. Or we also have Kara right over here. She also had a hard time discussing. Like, I don't know anything about that either, I guess. I mean, I don't think it makes a difference to anything. Yeah, I think it's just their existence that makes people talk about them, not so much the fact that people are actively moving towards them, I guess. So Dan and Kara highlight how they don't notice the dominant pathway. And when you don't notice a dominant pathway, you can't recognize emotions if you don't think about where you're walking or if there are other paths where you could walk. Right? And it's probably very confusing for Dan and Kara to consider, why are people getting stressed out about the dominant pathway? Because they don't have to think about it. another way of thinking about this too is that for people who succeed on the dominant pathway. And so oftentimes in my interviews, students who were part of high status fraternities or sororities, they actually didn't see the tier system. They didn't see a hierarchy difference between different fraternities and sororities. Kara is one of them. It was like, when I think of like the division in the Greek system, like as far as the sororities go, I think it's like not so much like a hierarchical division, just like certain sororities may not be known for not liking one another. I really don't know what how the hierarchy goes, like how it flows or how it even exists or whatever. But I think like what I mean is it depends on how much emphasis you place on it. Ron and Curtis were also from very high status fraternities. And again, they see the tier difference as just differences. So like there's two different social scenes. Like there's a group of fraternities that all hang out with each other. Then there's another group that all hang out with each other. So I wouldn't say that there's more a hierarchy. It's more a separate, like not even a separation. There's literally just two different social scenes. And Curtis attributes this all to kind of personality difference, right? It's different. I'd say when it comes to fraternities, there's a lot more personality within each of them. And I would say it's only a tier system when it comes to fraternities based on their success rate with pledge classes and how unified they are. So this in itself, right, can lead to another danger, where students believe your degree of success on the dominant pathway is due to your own personal qualities, such that being on the path and succeeding is something that is natural or innate. So take Alyssa, who again was also from a top-tier sorority, and says, WNL can be a hard place sometimes if you don't naturally have those kinds of qualities. And it was really interesting because Alyssa was actually thinking about one of her friends who was struggling with kind of stresses and pressures, and considers how the fact that maybe for a while she considers how the fact that maybe her friend is stressed out because her friend doesn't have as much money as the rest of the friends in the friend group, and that could potentially be stressful when it came to terms of like going on trips or going out. But then she reverts back to attributing her friend's stress to internalized sources. And again, right, she almost implies, right, that her friend is less equipped to handling stress than she is. If they put it on them, like, I don't know, like, right, okay, we can even start from the beginning. I mean, I do have a few friends who I know really feel some pressure sometimes, and I don't know where it comes from. If they put it on themselves, or if it's, I don't know, I mean, I've definitely been in the same kind of situation that she has before, where, you know, I feel down on myself sometimes. But I react differently than she does, I guess, so it makes me wonder if some of it's internal. Again, right, it's this type of perception that can lead to apathy and indifference as well. Because when you believe success comes solely from qualities within, when you don't recognize access to resources, can affect your access to resources and feelings like things like comfort or security or safety or respect may actually be dependent on the degree to which you're able to walk the dominant college pathway, then these contexts, right, are the ones that foster indifference. So that brings us to part 3, belonging. So my research makes a distinction. I love this picture. Fitting in and belonging are two very, very different things. And my research makes very clear a distinction between fitting in and belonging. And so this is a really important distinction because, again, assuming that fitting in within the dominant college pathway equates to belonging encourages problematic interventions like cultural assimilation. But it also leads us to ignore the issues of students who may fit in, but in actuality feel like they do not belong. So in my interviews, though they did think it was helpful, actually most students overwhelmingly did not see fit as essential or synonymous with belonging. So Gabrielle, right over here, says, you don't have to fill that image to be happy here. It does not have to define your experience at WNL. Or Colin, I don't exactly fit in, but like, it doesn't really matter. I found what's right for me. With that said, I do want to make the case for worrying about belonging by going back to the WNL parent email that I got. So I've highlighted the parts that I think are important. White is where I agree, because I agree, not everyone has to fit in, and not everyone is looking for the same college experience. However, since fit makes belonging feel easier, I do think schools should consider how to expand experiences, how to expand college pathways so that there's more normal used paths within the school. In terms of academics, it's always really interesting. In terms of academics, there seems to be less debate about the addition of pathways, right? So the addition of the Law, Justice, Society minor, or the data science minor. No one went around saying like, people are gonna stop studying business or studio art because we had those minors, or that like other minors all of a sudden lost their value. And so I just thought that was kind of interesting. But where I do disagree, right, is this idea that not everyone needs to have a sense of belonging. Belonging is important. It's important to both student and university success. And prior research really does make clear that belonging is a basic human need. So Strayhorn's model right over here shows a hierarchy of needs. And we need to achieve these lower levels before we can start to achieve any of the higher levels or work on the things that are needed for the higher levels. So his model shows that we need to obtain physiological needs like air, food, water, shelter before we can start worrying about safety, right, or security. And we have to be able to have a sense of safety and security before we can start thinking about love and belongingness, care, or support. But that we need to feel care and support for the things that universities actually value, which is building a sense of self-esteem, a sense of self-actualization or creativity or innovation. Thus, belonging is a fundamental basis, not just for students' individual success, but also for colleges' institutional missions of growing independent, self-actualized adults. Which brings us now, right, to the next question, which is, well, what does belonging mean? Well, to students over and over again in my interviews, no matter their race, their gender, their Greek status, their Greek tier, stated that belonging is relationships, respect, recognition. And whether that be friends, right, knowing people and having a relationship with them. So for example, like Paul, I belong is because I do have friends. How I know I belong is I'm happy. Or Ashley, I would be like walking down like past the colonnade, saying hi to all these people I know, and I know all of these people. There's a critical mass of people that I know. But also in receiving respect and recognition, as described by Cynthia. Positive interactions with people make you feel like you belong. People wanting to spend time with me as far as like the social realm, and in the academic setting, feeling that professors respect me. For Kyle, the biggest thing that makes you feel established is that some people know who you are, and people know what you're associated with, and you know what other people are associated with. So, going back to this idea of community beneficence, this is why belonging is so important, right? Because if we start with the assumption that everyone in our community deserves relationships, deserves respect, deserves recognition, in other words, then we would agree that everyone in our community deserves a sense of belonging. Thus, when conflict occurs, we can ask, what are the emotions, and how might those emotions be related to belonging, to obtaining and maintaining relationships, to obtaining and maintaining respect, to obtaining and maintaining recognition? And truly, right, once we do that, we have to really believe that those emotions they feel are real. Once that happens, what's the structural source of those emotions? And if we can do that same process for others, we can do that same process for ourselves, and that this can be the foundations of a community of beneficence. So going back to Karen's story, her talk was about individual responsibilities of beneficence to help others. On a community level, beneficence can then be the shared goodwill of wanting everyone in the community to feel like they belong, especially since it's a basic human need. And then to try to understand, why doesn't someone feel this way? In Storr's terms, to see what others in our community are worthy of belonging, and that we have a duty to help people in need of receiving, maintaining feelings of relationships, feelings of respect and recognition, whether or not we agree with them. And also, acknowledge that what is good for them and good for the community might not be in accordance to our own concepts of what I think is good or I think is good for them or what the community needs. And hopefully, right, if I can do that for others, then they can do the same back for me. And in this way, we don't have to agree or have the same goals, but to have a community of beneficence, we do have to listen. We have to really believe and then try to understand what might be inhibiting people's feelings of belonging. And hopefully, right, hopefully that brings the bubbles a little bit closer together, enough for dialogue. Cool. So I just want to say thank you to Carla and the Mud Center, and to Amber and Anumo for letting me use their work, and to everybody who's here in the audience, and like all the participants across all the different projects, and a whole bunch of other people from like my class and the Humanities and Research Group, and I have a team of RAs, and all of this couldn't be done without you guys. So I'm ready for questions. Woohoo!
We have time for maybe 2 sort of brief questions. Who would like to offer the first? Omar, do you want to grab right here?
Hi, Professor Chin.
Hey, Cam. Cam is on this list. Like, she did a whole bunch of interviews. It was awesome.
I have wondered for a long time, when you first started your research and you first started like recruiting people and it became like known to the public that you were doing this work, what were some of the general reactions that people had, especially in an environment like WNL where you're essentially like calling into question and putting a topic like this on the forefront based on the community we lived in?
Yeah, so like, are you asking, did I have problems recruiting?
No, I'm asking like, what were people's reaction to when you were like, oh, I'm doing this research, and this is what it's about, and I'm analyzing this school?
Really positive. Like, you know, this is what surprised me. I thought when I first started, I'll be really lucky if I can get like maybe about 30 students to talk to me for about 30 minutes. And then the thing blew up. I collected way more data than I absolutely had to, because by the end, 163 students talked to me on average for about 90 minutes. Some came back another time because they just kept wanting to talk. It was as if like I would be like, so, does WNL have an image? And then like, like a dam burst, you know, like they just couldn't stop. And I'd be like, the next person is here. I had to stop organizing people because I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll give them an hour. And I was like, oh, and like, I'd give myself an hour to sit and write field notes. And they were like going into other people's time. So it was like a dam broke. It wasn't just non-white students, but also white students too. They just, so it's actually interestingly positive across the whole spectrum. So I also purposely tried to get people from every single fraternity and sorority on campus. So I tried to just hit like everyone. And you know, I will say that there are some people who I'm more comfortable with, and I would say that it's probably true, like positionality. I resonated more with some students than others, because I do feel like there were a couple times where I just remember one student, like he came in, and I think he wasn't expecting me, and I'm not exactly sure why, but like he came in, and then he kind of like took a step back, and in conversations, the student is an extremely conservative student, is white. You know, we talked about it for a while. He, like, you know, doesn't seem as particularly maybe comfortable with minorities, but then by the end of the conversation, he stayed another 30. And I wish I pushed record back, because like we had a really interesting conversation about, and so this was 2015. 2016, about why he truly believed Trump would be elected, because like I did this before Trump's election, and like, you know, at the time, I don't know, you guys are probably too young to remember, a lot of people treated Trump campaign as kind of a joke, and he was just like, no, I'm a true believer, and like by the end, you know, like we were just talking about his true beliefs, and so I felt like I was surprised that people were as open as they were with me. Like I really expected people not wanting to talk, and then I was really surprised like how much people talked. Yeah. Thank you for the question. Yeah.
Hi.
Hey, Meg.
I was just curious where you saw this research going forward, like your next steps.
Yeah, you mean after this?
Yeah.
Well, I still need to like try to figure out this and do publications, but the next step I really, really want to do, so if anyone has connections at HBCUs, please let me know. I really want to actually do the same kind of thing at an HBCU. You know, like I know that will be different because it won't be my school, and positionality, it might be harder to talk with students between those two. But what I think is really interesting, right, is that in the context of organizations, PWIs, or predominantly white institutions, have all felt this pressure to diversify with regards to class, with regards to sexuality, with regards to race, just diversify a lot. But consequently, right, HBCUs are having to diversify for the exact opposite reason. Because they're losing funding, because like a lot, now that other schools are now allowing and you can come in, that they're losing populations, so then they're being forced to diversify for reasons, you know, the safe place that was a safe space is now kind of declining in population. And so I'm really interested in kind of what does it mean to fit in, what does it mean to belong, how do racial identities intersect, and also how does like the system, how does this impact kind of students' feelings of belonging at a different kind of school? So that's where I hope to go kind of in the next direction. Yeah, thanks for that question.
Well, Professor Chen, thank you so much for sharing your research with us and for seeding these conversations on campus.
Yeah, come and talk to me. Sign up for my office hours. We can have a conversation and talk about it.